So I thought I'd document the process of how I made this thing for a customer. I started by tracing a glove and just crudely sewing it, hand sewing it, and then going over all the seams with hot glue and a bit of excess fabric and just reinforcing the seam. Since this glove, it doesn't have to be clean, it can be sloppy, it doesn't really matter. You can see I made a little bead there, the red bead, of just a ball of hot glue, you know, just stuck on there. Don't burn yourself if you do this, but... And then here is another shot of the glove afterwards with the bottom painted black and a little bit of weathering, although in the end it's kind of pointless. I'm going to weather the rest of the thing anyway, so it didn't really matter if I put this coat of paint on there. And here's the original glove I used. It was just a gardening glove, but you can see it's torn up. It's not the best. It fit well, and it was a good glove, but I wanted the customer to have something a bit more authentic, so I took some water in a dirty glass. It didn't really matter. And then I took some black paint. Ignore that falling over in the background. So black paint, just squirted it in there, and just grabbed a paintbrush here in a second. Try to use one of these spongy paint brushes, the ones with a black sponge at the end. Those work the best for this type of weathering. You're just going to mix all of that in, mix it all together, make sure it's nice and uniform. You don't really want any chunks in this because the chunks could dry in odd patterns, and you want a nice even layer of sort of wet black paint. So I'm just taking the brush, going over the entire thing, and it looks a lot darker than it actually is. Because the paint is wet, it's going to make the fabric look way darker than it actually is. Just, you know, once it actually somewhat evaporates and dries, it should, you know, it should straighten out and look a little bit brighter, which is another thing. You may want to wait for the first layer to dry before you do another layer of this stuff, because you don't really know how it's going to look. So we're waiting to paint the bead until the whole thing is dry. You don't really want to paint that while the rest of the glove is wet. I don't feel like getting any red paint on the back of the glove, even though theoretically the wire and the armatures would hide that. I didn't feel like, you know, doing that. So I'm just getting all the paint everywhere, just everywhere I can, trying to make it look better than, you know, some of the store-bought gloves that are out there, especially at Spirit Halloween this time of year. This isn't complete replica. You should really think about getting a leather glove if you really want to go all out, but I wanted to make this as quick and fairly cheap for the customer as possible, so I just went ahead and just kept weathering away at this glove, making sure to get every area you could potentially see from the armature, because again, it's going to hide some of it, but not all of it. You don't want to leave anything too open, you know? So just keep weathering it, just keep going at it, and then I'm going to flip the glove. You'll see that there's already weathering on the underside because the paint is going to soak through a little bit, which is good. You know, you want this whole thing to be pretty much completely soaked. And it'll save you a bit of time with weathering, but, you know, still go over it, still get it underneath the fingers, even though you're going to cut holes in the palm of the fingers. The rest of the glove still has to look dirty. And that's pretty much it. Just going over it, trying not to leave any real traces of the original yellow paint. You'll have some areas of it, but, you know, that'll be fine. You know, if you're scary enough, nobody's gonna come up to you and judge the glove. I also didn't paint the inside of the glove, you know, where the black is on the inside. I decided to just leave that as it was. And, yeah. So far, that's just the paint. And here's the finished product so far. This is part 1, so tune in for part 2 to see how I paint the bead and make the knife.